Welcome to Scigest, your fortnightly science from the Bioeconomy Science Institute. Kia ora koutou katoa. Welcome to Scigest. I'm your host, Hilary Island. And welcome to part 2 of the 40-year anniversary celebration of the apple cultivars Jazz and Envy. In the spring of 1985, a pivotal breeding cross produced 2 of New Zealand's most successful apple varieties, Scifresh and Scilate, later commercialised and marketed by T&G Global as Jazz and Envy apples. Fast forward to today, Jazz and Envy are exported to over 55 countries, with Envy well on its way to becoming a billion-dollar brand. Together, Jazz and Envy set new standards for flavour, texture and quality on the global market. In this 2-part series, we celebrate the 40-year anniversary of Jazz and Envy. In part 1, we learned about the history and breeding process with Bioeconomy Science Institute Plant and Food Research Group apple breeder Richard Volz. Today, in part 2, we investigate the commercialisation journey that established Jazz and Envy as successful brands. Joining us today to tell us about that journey is T&G's Head of Global Marketing, Gemma Whiten. Gemma, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Hilary. Great to be here.
To start with, can you tell us about your role at T&G Global and also how you became interested in this area?
Yes, absolutely. So as you said, I'm the Head of Global Marketing here at T&G Apples. So my background a little bit really is I'm a total brand junkie. I come from an FMCG background, so fast-moving consumer goods, and my passion really is in building global brands. So I've done that for likes of Goodman Fielder, Kimberly-Clark and Unilever over in Europe and global brands. So being back in New Zealand, the opportunity to really disrupt a category in a way with brands is quite exciting with apples. This is traditionally quite a commoditized category. It's also a category with a huge growth potential. And so that opportunity to disrupt through brands was just too good. And that's why I've really been with the T&G for the last year, building those global brands that are Envy and Jazz, and really helping to make the most of the potential that we have with the brands, which is huge across our global markets.
Very cool. Sounds super exciting. So we asked the same question to scientist Richard Volz in the previous episode. So coming from your perspective, what do you think makes a good apple?
A good apple, I think we all have a perspective on what a good apple means. And I think that's probably really the starting point. This is a product that is for consumers and for consumers to enjoy. So the starting point really has to be consumers. And it's really understanding what consumers need and what they expect from a good apple. It's when and how they really engage with and eat apples as well. So those usage occasions and really understanding that. That's a really important starting point. And then once you understand, I suppose, those consumer needs and you cross that over with that expertise in superior genetics, then you can really start to build out what a good apple looks like. Because then what you can do is build a consistency of quality, of taste, of texture, of eating experience, essentially, that consumers expect to have from a good apple. And, what consumers do expect is to see a really engaging, consistent brand that also delivers a really, I suppose, consistent eating experience. And if you do that every time, then for consumers, you're meeting those needs of good apple. I suppose there's one other part to that as well, though, is that business side of things is that if we balance those consumer needs and then, of course, strong orchard economics as well, then we're really building a good apple from a business perspective and a good apple from a consumer perspective.
Wow, fantastic. What a great summary of what a good apple does. It's got to meet all of those needs, really. So this is a bit of a big question, and we'll explore it in detail as we go through the Jazz and Envy story. But in a nutshell, what are the 101 essentials of turning a new apple variety into a global consumer brand?
It is actually quite a big and, I suppose, complicated journey in some respects. We think of apples as, they're just a humble piece of fruit, but actually building something like that out into a global brand, does require quite a lot of energy, effort, time and experience, I suppose. So I think definitely it comes back to what I just mentioned, that starting point around really understanding consumer needs. And I think what you can do is if you combine those consumer needs and you can identify a really interesting new variety. When you get that intersection right between those two things, then you genuinely have something of real potential. So that's really the first part, is finding that intersection between those two things. Then it's really sitting there and going, right, how do we start to build that global brand? So understanding your consumers, understanding your markets, understanding your brand portfolios, and starting to develop that out into a global brand. So what is the positioning? What is that positioning for the apple? What occasions are we going after? Who is the target market? And then building from there, from that foundation, I suppose, the fundamentals for how the brand shows up in markets, so that you can really do that with consistency across your markets and across the channels in which you're building. So the next part is the really tricky part, I think, with apples, which is this real discipline of production, and that discipline around growing and quality, because what you have to make sure that you do is show up consistently all the time. Because if consumers are starting to engage with your brand, what they also want is a great experience, but they want that great experience to be really consistent. So it's really important to obviously control your scale, but also really tightly control that quality that you're delivering for consumers. And the really tricky part with apples, which is quite an interesting, exciting, dynamic part of apples, is matching that, demand and your supply. And I'm sure we'll probably talk about that a little bit later, but that's absolutely fundamental if you're going to build out a really global brand, is being able to match that supply and demand across multiple markets. And probably the final point, which cannot be, of course, underestimated, is that constant building of that technical growing capability, and making sure that you're constantly evolving that, constantly moving that forward in the supply chain management. So it's about that taking and understanding consumer needs, getting that varietal intersection right, building out that brand, and then really getting the fundamentals right in terms of growing, supply chain, and production to get it into market. If you're doing all of those things, it's quite a long list. If you're doing all of those things right, then you're able to build out that global consumer brand like we have with Envy and with Jazz.
Wow. Yes. Gosh, just like you said, very complicated process and a lot to get right. So for Jazz and Envy specifically, what did that process look like, going from the names themselves to the identity of the brand?
Yes, so it's about working with a good partner who really understands this space, and it's about us understanding, what do we want this brand to really stand for? What consumers do we want to target? Therefore, what is that sort of personality, tone of voice for that brand, and building that out. When you have that then enables you to use that as the foundation for the visual identity of the brand and how that comes to life. And then the most important thing is to do that with real consistency and continuity across your markets and across time. So that's the process we go through. And then once you do that, it's about making sure that you show up consistently across your markets. But it's also making sure that in the right ways, we're evolving the brands over time, so that the brands are always really relevant to consumers and to consumers in each of the markets in which you sell.
Can you say more on that last piece about evolving the brands? Like, what does that look like?
Yeah, so brand evolution is really interesting. So we have, for example, a very strong, well-known brand, really well-respected brand in Envy. And so what you need to do is make sure that you understand how your consumer needs are changing over time and evolve the brand to meet those needs. But what you don't want to do is be fundamentally changing your brand, all of the time, fundamentally changing every year, because you're not then going to really build those memory structures with consumers. So what I would say is that whilst consumers, maybe their media consumption, so what channels they're engaging with in terms of advertising and communications, in terms of where they shop, so retail channels, etc., those things do change. And, they do change with a reasonable pace, particularly when you're talking about Asian markets, for example. But what we do find is that, what consumers really want from, as you were talking about before, a good apple, that doesn't necessarily, fundamentally change all the time. So it is about, us having the expertise in growing, expertise in quality, expertise in supply chain, so we're getting great fresh apples out to consumers, and that consistent experience of our products, day in, day out over multiple years. But the way in which we show up in markets, the brand shows up in markets, will evolve a little bit over time.
Understood. Right. Nice and clear. Thank you. So you've mentioned the importance of consumer needs driving this process, and of course then finding the intersection between that and production. But what role did consumer research play in shaping the way Jazz and Envy were marketed internationally?
Yes, it is fundamental. Understanding those consumer needs is really, really key. There are always cultural nuances. There are always different market nuances, but there are also real inherent needs that sit above cultural nuances. And so it is about understanding both of those levels. And consumer research really does help us to do that and understand that. So it is an important part of the work that we do in building the foundations of a brand, but also how we evolve a brand and how we ensure that we are always evolving to meet the needs of consumers across a variety of markets.
Is there an instance where the brand name might do well in some markets but not in others?
Yes, I suppose in any global brand that is the case. But the job of building a global brand is, if you're really understanding the consumer insights, if you're really understanding the needs, they certainly transcend and sit above any smaller cultural nuances. And you do have to understand both, for sure. But that's why we have already a global brand in Envy, because we have a fantastic positioning for the brand and an amazing eating experience. And both of those things are really well appreciated across all of the various different markets in which we sell. So Envy is currently sold across just over 55 markets across the globe. So it is about making sure that we do have that consistency in the eating experience and the consistency in how our brand shows up. And you can then really build and scale a global brand out of that.
Wonderful. Really cool. Yeah, quite a difference in developing a global brand as opposed to, a more local brand. There's a lot of considerations. So you've mentioned Envy grown in or supplying 55 markets. Where are Jazz and Envy apples actually grown, and how do you ensure consistency and quality when they're being grown in different countries and in different climates?
So currently, yes, Envy is sold across the 55 markets. It's grown in about 13 different countries. Jazz is grown across about 11 different markets or countries and sold in over 50. So yes, we do have that spread, but we have a really solid network of independent licensed growers that we work with and have very established relationships with, and we build those relationships out over time. We also have our T&G owned orchards, here in the Hawke's Bay in New Zealand. And the way in which you manage that really is those very stringent quality processes, making sure that we have those processes and controls in place to ensure that fruit is always grown to those same standards, because Envy stands for a particular standard for a particular experience that our consumers are looking for. So that consistency is essential. So I think first and foremost, it really is that expertise in growing and consistency of growing. It is stringent quality controls that are put in place and how they're managed with consistency across all of our growers. And then the final piece to the puzzle, which is, again, as I said, really complex, but is that integrated supply chain, and really managing that supply chain well to make sure that our apples are turning up 365 days, fresh apples in markets, great eating experience, regardless of where they've been grown and regardless of where they've come from.
Wow, really setting the standard of excellence, really, when it comes to getting a quality apple. Well done. So what were some of the biggest challenges in marketing a New Zealand-grown apple to global markets?
Yeah, I don't think there are inherent challenges necessarily in that. So I think the New Zealand piece has been really important for us in terms of delivering that credibility, which is neat. There is real strong credibility in having produce and fresh produce out of New Zealand. So it's a massive benefit, and real innovation leadership as well. New Zealand is very well known for that. So that's certainly a fantastic starting point. But what we're building here is global scale. We're building a global business. And yes, we happen to be, from New Zealand, but our suppliers from multiple countries around the world, and we supply across, obviously many, many markets and countries. And so our global scale really helps to ensure real relevance, accessibility of our brands, and that year-round availability, because you can't give something to consumers that they start to engage with, know about, and really enjoy, and then take it away again. What we're building here is a really sustainable long-term business, so that 365-day supply is a really important part of our strategy and what really differentiates us as well and our brands. And so, yes, that challenge is, of course, delivering that quality and that consistency, regardless of country of origin, whether it's New Zealand or any of our other markets. But we've invested a huge amount to ensure that, through the quality processes, etc. So I think we've got all of the benefits of being originally a New Zealand business. And now we have all of the benefits of being a global business with global scale. And we've got, all of those global markets within which to build our brands.
Fantastic. You mentioned sustainability, and I suppose one of the ideas around a New Zealand grown anything supplied to the world is a concern over sustainability. And it sounds like you're managing that tension through having these apples grown around the world. Is sustainability part of the brand messaging at all?
Yeah, it's an excellent question. And it's one that I think marketers have spent a huge amount of time, mulling over the last few years. Last decade, really. So sustainability is fundamentally important. It is fundamentally important for us as a business to ensure that we are doing everything in a very responsible, sustainable manner, and that we are always improving on that as well. There are always ways that you can improve as a business. So that's the first point. That's fundamental. In terms of consumers and consumer needs, so I have come from a background in this space working in selling sustainable brands. And even when you're selling truly sustainable brands, consumers will first and foremost always engage with and expect the benefits within that category that they are shopping. So they'll expect that first. Then, if they are so inclined, you can reassure them on that sustainability piece, then that is of interest. So I think a really good example in this space is Allbirds shoes.
Oh, yes.
Allbirds shoes are considered the most sustainable footwear in the world, yet their messaging is not about sustainable footwear. Their primary messaging is around comfort, and they really are like walking on the clouds. They're amazing. But so it is all about comfort and like how great the shoes look, because that's what consumers look for first and foremost in the category. So with us from an Apple perspective, we have to really deliver against those needs, those consumer needs of what are those occasions and when are they, wanting to eat apples, when are they sharing it with their families, etc. That's really important, delivering that eating experience, and then where and when relevant, we can talk to that sustainability story.
Yes, right. Fantastic. So it sounds like it's been a really interesting commercialisation journey for Jazz and Envy. Can you talk about any special standout moments that happened along the way?
Yeah, I suppose the standout moments for us, there are so many as you build a global brand and a global business. I think it's the standout moments for us are really realising and seeing many, many years of year-on-year growth, for the brands. And I think that's a real standout moment because it says we have something very special and powerful in our brands in Envy and Jazz, and the positioning of those brands, the experience of those brands and the markets that we're going into. So I think that's certainly a special moment for us. I think another special moment for us is our in-market teams. So it really is a core competency because we are building such a large-scale global brand. And it's one of the things that is one of our core competencies, but really does stand us apart from a lot of the other models out in the market, is that we have these in-market teams. And those in-market teams enable us to have a really deep understanding of the consumers in those markets, of the retailers in those markets. And what that does is it enables us to just continue to supercharge the brand. So I think one of the special moments for us is continuing to drive those in-market teams, but to open more and more offices. So most recently, we've opened Taiwan as well. So I think that's a really important time for us as well. And then I suppose the last point is really just seeing how much our consumers really love and enjoy the brand. And you see that in Asia, particularly through, gifting moments and gifting times, but also it's not just gifting, their love of the brand. And you can see that through the sales right the way through the year, 365 days. And you get that feedback from consumers. You get, it's an Apple, but we get messages from consumers and they talk about it. So I think as particularly a marketer and also, any of our growers, that's a special moment when people are genuinely enjoying the products, the apples that we are growing and selling. That's always a special moment.
That sounds really exciting. What a rewarding position to be in. So what makes Envy in particular well positioned to become a billion-dollar brand? And how is that being pursued?
Yes, so Envy's well on the way to being a billion-dollar brand, and we have had very strong growth for many years now. That says we've got something really quite special, and we've got something that has real power to continue to disrupt this category, but to deliver really strong growth. So we've had many, many years of, constant and consistent growth across multiple markets. So in many respects, whilst, yes, it is a very established brand and it's done really well, to be honest, we're only just getting started. We have so much more potential ahead of us in markets, in regions, and channels. So there's a huge amount of growth ahead of us as well. And I think the important thing is not just the volume growth that we've seen year on year, but also that ability to hold premium prices. And so that's fundamental in our strategy as well. This is not just about selling a whole lot of volume. This is about building a brand, and in doing so, we know that consumers pay more for brands. They pay a premium for brands with which they really engage, brands that have a really strong brand equity. And we've really seen that play out. In 2024, it was a tough market in the US. And what we saw is that Envy really held and had price resilience. So whilst the wider Apple category softened from a value point of view over 20%, so I think it was 22% actually it softened, Envy essentially held its price premium, so we only dropped by 1%. So you can see that engagement with the brand helps us to maintain those price premiums. So we've seen, we're the fastest growing Apple brand across major Asian retailers. We've got experience in building that brand, which enables us to hold that premium price. And so you're delivering both on volume and value. So that really means that we're well and truly on track to deliver that 15 million TCEs by 2030. So we're well on track to be that billion-dollar brand.
Right. You mentioned TCEs there. Can you explain to the listeners? Thanks.
Yes, sorry, that's very Apple speak. So tray carton equivalents. So essentially each one is around about 18 kgs of fruit.
Right.
So you're talking 15 million TCEs, you're probably looking at 300,000 US tons. That kind of, it's a lot of apples.
It sounds like it.
A lot of apples.
Yes. So you mentioned the need to, control volume. And so does that speak back to your earlier point about the need to balance that supply and demand in order to get those premium prices?
It is about balancing and making sure that your supply and demand meet and match, yes. But ultimately, the power of brands is what unlocks premium price.
Okay.
Building brands that truly engage with consumers, that meet their needs, that provide a consistency, that they trust in, that that understand when they're eating, so those occasions that are providing for those occasions. And in Asia, that also gifting. Our apples are really very, very popular for gifting. it's about understanding all of that. So if you do that, then you're able to continuously, as we have been, deliver year-on-year growth in terms of our demand growth and that demand that consumers have for our apples, whilst critically at the same time maintaining that price premium. So it enables you to balance out, supply demand and that volume coming on, at the same time as not dropping back into the sort of, I suppose, traditional way of commoditized categories, which is then they lose their value. And so the way that we are really driving value through this category is through our brands, because they enable us to not only charge a premium, but to consistently charge that premium and consistently across all of our markets.
Okay. Given that many other cultivars sort of have those stringent requirements for consistent fruit quality, what is it about the Envy brand in particular, if you could sum it up in one thing, that builds that really strong engagement with customers compared to other successful brands?
I'd probably, if I have to do it in just a few words, maybe I can't do one word, but I might do three. So a new tagline for the brand that we'll be really consistently rolling out for many, many years is reach for exceptional.
Oh.
And we have seen that come through time and time again. You know, people do believe it really is an exceptional brand. It makes them really stand apart as a consumer. You know, food is really important as a way of demonstrating that you're enhancing your lifestyle. You know, you're using food choices to project a certain sort of sophistication, taste, and sense of being in the know, that kind of thing. And that's really important, particularly, you know, in Asian markets. And so I would say that Envy does that as a brand and as an Apple experience. And so exceptional would be your one-word answer. Envy.
Well done, you did
exceptional.
it in one word.
I got there.
Envy, right. Very cool. So looking ahead, how is this success story of Jazz and Envy shaping the marketing strategies for future apple varieties?
Yes, we've got definitely some coming our way from a T&G perspective. So I suppose we have a tried and tested strategy now. You know, we've been really investing in this brand strategy and brand building strategy for many, many years now. It's really paid off. It's really working. So we are now really in execution and delivery mode. You know, we know what our strategy is. We know what that end-to-end system needs to be. We know how to build that out. We've got all of some real fundamentals in place in terms of genetics and orchards, growers, post-harvest, which we've really invested in, and that brand building. So what we can now do is we've got all of those pieces of the puzzle. We know what we need to do, so we can just go all into execution and delivery mode. And that is about continuing to build out, obviously, our heroes in Envy and Jazz, but also, you know, there are additional consumer needs that we can meet out there. And so one of our launches that we have coming up in coming years is Jolie, which we're really excited. It's a fantastic apple, and it is just absolutely perfect for those family sharing moments. And therefore, you know, it will really help to build out our portfolio of brands, and we can continue to use that real understanding that we have and, you know, quality growing supply chain, but with that in-market expertise and our understanding of how you build, you know, brands for the apple category, we can use that to obviously continue to expand and build out our portfolio as makes sense. And that really helps to make sure that we have a really strong business in the medium and long term, not just, you know, in the now, in the short term.
Absolutely. That's such a fascinating process to try and identify those specific consumer needs and then tailor apple varieties to those needs to move it really away from that commodity item to something really special that meets a specific need. It's very cool.
It is cool, and it's the opportunity we have to really disrupt a category that really hasn't, you know, been disrupted and sort of driven traditionally, you know, for centuries by brands as many other categories have. So we know that we have really strong, solid brands right now But that's also why we can see we have so much potential ahead of us as well.
So the future looks super exciting for the apple industry, which excites me because I'm an apple researcher. So thrilled to hear that we're looking at a future with billion-dollar brands. Thank you so much for your time. It's been a pleasure speaking with you today, Gemma. Thank you for being the spokesperson for the 40-year overnight success of Jazz and Envy, and for sharing your expertise in the key role of commercialisation in shaping New Zealand's primary industries. Thank you for your time, Gemma.
Many thanks, Hilary. Great to chat.
And thank you out there for listening. If you'd like to know more about the topics covered on Sigest, check out the episode pages on the Plant and Food Research website. Please also subscribe to or follow the Sigest channel and rate and review each episode. Thank you and mā te wā.